A quick question to both the witnesses, Madame Lalancette and Mr. Caulfield. Are you familiar with the news articles from August talking about a bot campaign backing the leader of the Conservative Party? Are you familiar with that? We'll start with you, Madame Lalancette, just if you can indicate yes or no.
Yes.
And Mr. Caulfield?
Yes, and I'm familiar with other bot campaigns.
So there was a ton of media, and I want to read one of the headlines. This is from CTV News. It says, Conservatives reject online bot allegation after Poilievre rally. So this article is set up, and it has the Conservatives denying a charge that's been made against them. Now, I want to fast forward you both to the 16th of August. No, we'll say the 28th of August, where a Canadian press story was published across different outlets. I'm looking at it in the National Post. And that one's titled, No Evidence, Conservatives Were Behind Social Media Bot Campaign That Praised Poilievre Study. And this study was done by the Canadian Digital Media Research Network. And their findings were that there was no evidence that indicate a political party or foreign entity employed this bot network for political purposes. So I just, with that precursor, I just, before I ask my question, are you familiar with that reporting that was done that I'm citing from the National Post? Mr. Caulfield?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, I am, but I don't know the depth of the
Sure.
of the issue.
Madame Lalancette?
I know the work of this research center, but I haven't read the report.
So, so we have a situation where we're talking about the spread of misinformation, and we had two political parties. We had the Liberals and the NDP. They went out, and the media printed as sure as fact that, without having verified the claims, that this was something that was paid for, and there were allegations that it was orchestrated through foreign state actors. Now, we're at a time in our country where we have an inquiry happening into foreign interference in our democracy, and we have real state actors who are spreading disinformation, and it's being propagated in of course in the political discourse, but also in media. But here we have an example where once we have an independent group who disproved the claim that was printed without it having been proven, and then we have political parties in the Liberals and the NDP who didn't withdraw the allegation, or didn't say, oh, I stand to be corrected, or we believe this because it was again leveraged for partisan purposes. Let me read you a quote from the author of the report. The finger pointing without evidence is actually quite destructive and leans into this hyper-partisan, hyper-polarized information ecosystem that we find ourselves in today in Canada. So the study says that the initial bot campaign that was used received very little attention because it was from like sock puppet accounts, and so they don't have a real following. But it was amplified, with millions of impressions by people with political actors, Canadian political actors, who didn't have altruistic intentions, and is this type of, I'll start with you, Madame Lalancette, is this type of misinformation that's being propagated, in this case, by the Liberals and the NDP. Is this part of the problem? Because certainly that's what the report's author suggested.
We have a minute.
Yes, it is what I was talking about in my presentation. So disinformation comes not only from bots or foreign countries, but it also comes from the way political actors are communicating and want you to believe something. So they are communicating that they feel that this is foreign interference, that the party bought the bots in order to get attention. So yes, this is part of the problem, but it's not coming only from it's coming from everywhere. Right now in the chamber, it's not a party association. You can see it in every ways, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Caulfield, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Caulfield, how much money have you received from the Trudeau Foundation?
Personally,
No, in the way of research funding.
in 2012, I was honored to receive a Trudeau Fellowship, which is a peer-reviewed research award that is awarded.
Just how much? Just how much?
In 2010, I think it was $200,000, and that was for research purposes.
And have you received
I
any
haven't
other
received-
remuneration from the Trudeau Foundation?
No, in fact, since I'm going to say 2013, I've had very little to do with the Trudeau Foundation. I was involved briefly at the beginning of the pandemic. They had a pandemic response committee that I sat on. It involved academics from across the country, but I believed I sat on that committee for I think we had just a handful of meetings.
And
no money.
sorry to cut you off. 'Cause my time is limited. The committee that you're referring to was the Trudeau Foundation's COVID-19 Impact Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I received no remuneration for that.
Thank you for that. How much money have you received from the Trudeau government in the way of research grants in the past 2 years to study misinformation and disinformation?
So would this be from entities like the Canadian Institutes, the independent Canadian Institutes of Health Research?
Government agencies, Trudeau government, how much money?
So from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, in 2020, I received, I believe, about $300,000 to study misinformation. This was a peer-reviewed grant, as you know, that's held by the university. I shared that grant with 2 other institutions, the University of Calgary and the University of Regina, and that money was used to support trainees and research.
Okay, thank you.
And then since...
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Caulfield, and you ended with since. Go ahead.
Oh, and I'm also fortunate now I'm an advisor of an entity called Science Up First, and we've also received funding from the government. Again, I don't receive any personal funding.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I appreciate those answers, but I do want to ask you why it is that you didn't disclose that up front, your connections to the Trudeau Foundation, the fact that you have received a significant amount of research money specifically on the subject matter of misinformation and disinformation from none other than the Trudeau government, and you have come to this committee and presented yourself as an objective expert, even though you have provided a submission
Mr. Cooper,
to this committee.
I have a point of order. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
Thank you. And my point of order is on relevance. I doubt that this line of questioning deals with the expertise that Professor Caulfield brings to the table on this very important study.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid.
Yeah,
and members know I allow a lot of latitude here and attitude when it comes to questioning. It's the member's time. Mr. Cooper has the right to ask whatever question he wants, as uncomfortable perhaps as those questions may be, or perhaps some members may not like those questions. Mr. Caulfield, I'm going to let Mr. Cooper finish here, and then you can answer, sir, okay? Go ahead, Mr. Cooper. You have 2 minutes left. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Caulfield, why did you not disclose that to the committee up front?
I am fortunate to be an academic at the University of Alberta, and as an academic, I have a responsibility to try to bring in research grants to do independent research. As all academics, I receive grant funding from various sources that it's independent. I don't receive it personally, and that's how research is funded in Canada. And by the way,
well, with the greatest of respect,
sir?
taking back my time, I think it's highly germane that you were a fellow at the Trudeau Foundation. You received $200,000+ from the Trudeau Foundation. You sat on a Trudeau Foundation committee as recently as 4 years ago, and you've been funded by the Trudeau government, and yet you come out and you present yourself as an objective expert when you have written hit pieces on Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives and submitted a brief that singles out or largely singles out Conservatives as spreading misinformation and disinformation. I think this committee deserves better. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
If I may comment.
Yes, you've got
Mr.
50
Chair.
seconds, Mr. Caulfield. Go ahead, please.
I am fortunate to have received most of my research grants, the largest research grants, under the Harper government. And I have continued to by far, by the way. So I suppose I should have disclosed that also. I endeavor, when I write pieces about the politics of misinformation, to make it very clear that misinformation happens historically, contextually, across the ideological divide. And I do my best to represent exactly what the research says. And I think it's very important to understand the role of politics and ideology in the spread of misinformation right now. It isn't easy to hear that stuff, and I do try to be, as much as possible, not to be partisan about this, but this is a very important topic, and we have to be open-minded about the role of politics.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sousa for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate you being here on this very important issue. I've reviewed testimony on the past, on this issue from the past. Now, Professor Caulfield, I think you'd agree with me that government has what we would call a positive obligation to act when it comes to disinformation and misinformation, correct?
I think so, given the gravity of the issue.
Certainly. And that positive obligation goes right down to the bottom person working the line at Elections Canada, and it goes right up to the top to the Prime Minister. You'd agree with that?
I would agree with that.
So if the government fails to act when it has what I would call certainly a moral duty, and I would actually say a legal duty to act, that is what we would in law often call an omission, right? A duty to act and a failure to act. We have common ground there, I take it?
I think so. I'm not sure of the context. I anticipate there's more to come.
Oh, well, yes, there's certainly more to come. My point is this. We have a situation where one of our former colleagues, Kenny Chu, is no longer here, and there is clear evidence of misinformation. We also know that 11 people have either wittingly or semi-wittingly, those aren't my words, those are the words of a report, have been assisted by hostile states. I'm paraphrasing here. Now, in situations where the Prime Minister knows or Elections Canada knows, there is obviously then a failure to act by them is propagating the very thing that we should be shining the light on, is it not?
This is what I'll say. I feel so passionately about this issue. I agree that we need an incredibly high standard for public officials, for politicians, when it comes to issues of misinformation, for explaining when it has happened or when misinformation perhaps has not been clarified for the public in a way that can ensure trust. So I think that we are on the same page. I think it's very important.
I just have 20 seconds. Sorry, I just have 20 seconds there. My point is this. When the government has information, it should act. And when it doesn't act, it fails not only the people who've built their lives on running for office, it denigrates and degrades the very democracy that we stay here and are standing here and purporting to defend. Would you agree?
quickly.
I think I'm not sure the exact context of that comment, but it sounds like I agree with the spirit of what you're saying.
Okay.
I apologize if I don't know the specifics to which you refer.
It's hard, Mr. Coffey's for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. It's appreciated to take time out from your schedule, especially when we're dealing with something so important. Now, I'm going to focus my time with Mr. Kalga, and I've reviewed your testimony, and I'm not sure if our two witnesses, whether they were online for the last round. I'm not sure. Can anybody just give me a thumbs up, yes or no? Nope, they were not? Okay. So I apologize. I'm going to cover some ground that I covered during the last round. Now, Mr. Kalga, I'm going to present some things I think are probably fairly straightforward. I've reviewed your prior testimony. I've reviewed the testimony of a former colleague of ours, Kenny Chu, as well, when it comes to foreign interference, because to me, that is one of the central issues of misinformation and disinformation. Obviously, it's my view, and I hope you will agree, Mr. Kalga, that government has what we would say in law is an obligation to prevent electoral interference, and that obligation starts from the bottom at Elections Canada and any other enforcement agencies and goes right up to the top to the Prime Minister. We've got agreement on that, I take it?
Yeah, in principle, yes, I agree.
Of course. Yes. I'm not trying to trap you or anything. It's fairly, to me, that's really trite. The reality is most of us have worked very hard to get here. It's not easy. So when there is interference in an election and there is uncertainty as to whether or not it affected the election, I'm talking about both on the national level and on the riding level, that's going to be a win for any hostile state actors that are intervening, correct?
Yeah, I would agree.
The fact that we're even talking about this, it shows that the intervention itself was to some degree successful. Is that right?
To a degree.
Yep.
Maybe.
So, okay, fair enough. Clearly, there was foreign interference in the election in Richmond-Stevenson. Stevenson. Oh, thank you. The government knew about this, and they did nothing. Now, at what point should we, as Canadians, at what point should the government be acting? Should they not be acting immediately and informing Canadians by shining the light on this? Because that is what the best disinfectant, the best anecdote, if you will, or antidote, I should say, to electoral interference and the misinformation that comes with it?
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I should note that at DisinfoWatch, we were made aware of these efforts about 2 to 3 weeks into the writ period. And it took us maybe 4 or 5 days to analyze the data that we received from various different sources, including sources within the Chinese community in Canada. And we produced an election alert that we posted to our website about a week and a half before Election Day. And so, you know, I think that as a civil society organization, as an independent civil society organization, we have the ability to act a little bit more nimbly and quickly. Now, did that alert prevent the interference from happening? No, I mean, it had already happened at that point. I don't know, you know, whether we were able to have any impact, but I think that in future elections, the government and the organizations that are being set up inside of that to monitor elections should be much more quick to report instances of interference in the election. There are very simple ones that instances that could have been reported quickly, including the Global Times piece that was published in Chinese state media attacking the Conservative Party and its leader, Mr. O'Toole. That could have been reported very quickly. So I would think that in future elections, we need to improve those timelines to get that reporting out there. Any sort of instances of interference, efforts to interfere in our elections should be reported much more quickly than they were during the last election.
Well, certainly, and I mean now we've got 11 people who have been identified as either wittingly or semi-wittingly having been assisted by hostile states. We don't know their names. If light is the best disinfectant, and we have been slow to react when it comes to foreign interference, I think we can agree on that. Are we not just perpetuating the exact same pattern of the government, and this goes right to the highest level because the decision is with the Prime Minister, are we not just perpetuating that more and more by failing to act in this instance right here, right now?
Well, I would agree. I think at all levels, I've been advocating for quite some time for greater transparency when it comes to collaboration with foreign governments, especially authoritarian foreign governments. And I think C-70 will go a long way to helping along with that. So yes, I mean, I would
apologize for cutting you off. I just want to end with this quote, and this is from Kenny Chu. This is what he said at Foreign Interference on April 30th, 2024. What I heard during the hearings shook that up a little bit because it looks like there are some Canadians who are more valuable and worthy of protection than others. And I hope that every Canadian, regardless of what party they run with, is worthy of protection in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And Mr. Kolga and Mr. Bengio. Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kolga, when you appeared before the Procedure and House Affairs Committee back in November 2022 as part of its study on foreign election interference, you gave testimony and I asked you some questions about Beijing's disinformation campaign in Steveston, Richmond East. Since then, a lot of new information has emerged from the public inquiry and in other fora, including this committee. Last week, the Office of the Commissioner of Canada Elections tabled a report at the public inquiry on foreign election interference. The report confirmed that the PRC targeted former MP Kenny Chu in Steveston, Richmond East as part of a disinformation campaign designed to drive voters away from him using fairly sophisticated efforts, including through the amplification of such disinformation on social media platforms. Madam Justice Hogue, in her initial report back in the spring, noted that, quote, there is a reasonable possibility that these narratives could have impacted the result in this riding. In other words, the disinformation was significant enough that it could have tilted the balance in terms of the outcome of the election in that particular riding, resulting in the defeat of Mr. Chu. I find that alarming. Do you? It seems to me it should sound the alarm of how serious the threat of foreign interference from hostile foreign states, including the PRC, is to our democracy and the integrity of our elections.
Well, I have no doubt that that operation did impact the result. Now, whether it tilted the result one way or the other in any significant way, we don't know that. But there's no doubt that it had some form of impact. What to do about this in the future? Again, I will go back to my statement earlier. We tried to raise the alarm about that operation as it was happening, or shortly after we observed it happening. this is something that needs to be done in the future. And I think that I'm not sure that it's the government necessarily that has a role in doing that, but certainly empowering civil society organizations, those that are monitoring the information space, who understand it, who understand where to look, to empower those groups and individuals who are doing that work so that they can alert Canadians, Canadian media, to those sorts of efforts when they're happening. That will help build resilience and strengthen our democracy.
Well, you indicated that perhaps it's not the role of government, but there were structures and processes in place at the time of the 2021 election. I would note that in May of 2021, an IMU was sent to the Minister of Public Safety that specifically noted that Kenny Chiu's riding was of high interest to the PRC. That IMU went into a black hole. The minister claims he never saw it, even though it went to himself, then Minister Blair, his chief of staff, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety. Following the Global Times article on September the 9th of 2021, the Rapid Response Mechanism at Global Affairs Canada highlighted the disinformation that was being spread. That was provided to the election committee that had been set up by the government to counter foreign interference and to bring awareness to interference activities. And through it all, Kenny Chiu was left to drown in a sea of disinformation. And not only did he drown, in fact, there is evidence that the Liberal Party actually amplified the disinformation being spread by the Beijing-based regime. So not only is it the case that the PRC intervened in the Steveston-Richmond East election or riding, but one of the major political parties, namely the Liberal Party, actually amplified the disinformation, perhaps resulting in the defeat of Kenny Chiu. So would you agree that the system failed Kenny Chiu and failed the voters of Steveston-Richmond East?
I'm going to have to ask you to do this very, very quickly, Mr. Kolga, please.
Well, I would absolutely say that there's room for improvement within that system to ensure that when these instances are detected in upcoming elections, that they are brought to the attention of those individuals who are being targeted. And that goes beyond elections. That goes to those spaces between elections when whether it's elected officials, candidates, activists are being targeted by information operations, they need to be notified. So there's lots of room for improvement.
Good. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Baines for...
I want to provide the witnesses with some context about a situation that's unfolded over the last week. On September the 22nd, CTV News aired a segment about a confidence vote that was going to come before the House. And in that segment, CTV deliberately misrepresented the comments of the leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. Now, this is incredibly serious. So we're talking about CTV News. They're owned by a media giant in this country. They're owned by Bell. And what happened is shocking. So CTV News spliced together different parts of the leader of the opposition's comments to create a false impression. Well, first of all, created a false statement, something that he never said. But the intention was to create a narrative that the opposition day motion was not about having a carbon tax election, which was what it was about, but was instead that it was to oppose the Liberals' dental care program as opposed to it being about the carbon tax. And this isn't a situation where we have an error, a misunderstanding during the editing process, or some kind of technical issue. This isn't something that can be communicated away. This was very clearly an effort by a media company, by a news organization, to manipulate the statements of the Leader of the Opposition on the eve of a confidence vote in the House of Commons in a minority parliament. And we're talking about misinformation here, and the need to trust, who we can trust, worried about what we see online. But here we have CTV News. We all know who CTV News is, and they created a statement. They spliced together multiple sentences to say something that the Leader of the Opposition did not say. Conservatives were calling for a carbon tax election. They made it about something else. So how damaging is this to Canadians' confidence in trusted sources if they can't trust that a major news outlet will just simply report on what's actually being said by the Leader of the Opposition, and instead deliberately editing a clip to have him say something that he never said?
Mr. Kolga, do you want to start with him?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Kolga, and then we'll go to Mr. Bengio. You've got 2 minutes to respond.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm an expert on foreign information and influence operations, not on CTV's editorial policies. But I would agree that it's very important that Canadians are able to trust their media sources, especially in these times where trust is declining in media. But again, I'm an expert in foreign influence and information operations, not on these sorts of domestic situations.
I mean, it looks to me like they took it straight from the playbook from foreign entities that look to sow disinformation in our country. To the second witness.
I'm even farther away from this question, being an expert in AI. Sorry.
Yeah, it's I think that we have a real problem in our country. We're looking outside to examine the effects of interference, of misinformation, of disinformation, and this is an example of disinformation. This is something that demonstrably did not occur. That they edited together. We talk about deepfakes. They didn't use AI. They used an editing suite to create a lie, and it's shocking. It's really low tech, actually. It's low tech domestic disinformation, and the fact that that organization is heavily subsidized by the Trudeau government, and then took to undermine the Leader of the Opposition on the eve of a confidence vote, I think tells us something very scary about interference in our democratic institutions by the powerful who favor Justin Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr.